The morning sun poured down on Willow Creek, like a blade not gentle like spring mist, but sharp, like reckoning. Heat didn't creep in slowly. It crashed over the town, like someone had opened a gate to fire. Earth-baked air rose off cracked streets, curling along the saloon's awning, slipping through weathered wood slats of the shuttered general store. The town was bathed in sunlight, but something was missing. The breath of it, the life. And in truth, the town was holding its breath. Everyone was there. Reverend Marks in his threadbare collar, the young waitress from the diner, old men with tobacco-stained fingers. No one spoke. Only the rustle of worn dresses in the wind, and the dull knock of wooden heels on porch planks. At the heart of it all, in a square of blinding light, stood a girl, whose stillness cut through the dust like a knife. Clara Rose Callahan, 20 years old, amber eyes deep and still, like water just before the storm. Her faded gray dress had once been meant for Christmas Eve, now worn thin at the hem and stiff with dirt. Her hair, a dusky auburn, was pinned too tight, a quiet crown, for a day no woman should be asked to survive. She didn't bow her head, didn't look at the people. Clara looked beyond toward the ridge, at the far edge of town, where no one stood and nothing spoke. Only sky and a sliver of hope, too fragile to name. 4 sisters were already gone, not dead, but it felt the same. Torn apart, like pages from a book, each handed over to fate. Josephine had left, with a rancher's mother promised to his son. Edith had been claimed by a banker, in boots too polished. No one truly knew. They left in a woman's carriage with silver handles and eyes that looked like cold stone. Clara hadn't cried. Tears were a luxury. She'd let them die long ago. The day her mother, fevered and fading, whispered, "Don't ever let them take your dignity, even if they take everything else." Now her father, Silas Callahan, stood among the crowd, too drunk to keep his feet straight. He didn't look at her. He'd sold off everything he once called his, including the daughters he used to kiss goodnight. Auctioneer Fitch, a man who'd once danced with her mother in a barn lit by candlelight, tapped his gavel gently. His eyes, bleary with sun, swept the line of men at the front. "We come now to the final lot," he said, voice rasping like a string pulled too tight. Clara Rose Callahan, 20 years, reads rights, cooks passably, clean bill of health. Murmurs flickered like bees in briar. A wide-hatted man said $18. 20, barked another voice, sharp breath smelling of whiskey and rot. Clara didn't flinch. She looked at her boots, scuffed, dried out, and shut her eyes. In that moment she thought she heard her sisters laugh again. A fragment of life, untouched by the trade. 35, someone called. A wave of noise rippled through the watchers. Then, like thunder in the stillness, a voice rang out from the back. 100. Silence fell like a stone. Even the wind paused to listen. All eyes turned to the speaker, a man leaning against the weathered post of the old church. His shadow stretched across the dust, like a drawn blade. He wore plain dark trousers and a shirt with sleeves rolled past the elbow collar open. No gun, just a leather-bound book in one hand, and a stillness in his gaze that didn't waver. "Who the hell's that?" Fitch muttered. The man said nothing. His eyes held only Clara. "I'm not here to buy anyone," he said. His voice didn't shout. It struck clean and steady. "I'm here to offer my name, if she'll have it." Whispers cracked through the heat like sparks. Some scoffed, some sneered. A few gasped, hoping for scandal. But Clara, she blinked once, then really looked. She didn't know him, not truly. But the name came from stories half told, over kitchen tables. Elias Boone, former scout, built a cabin beyond Dust Creek, said to be haunted by something he couldn't outrun. He looked at her not like property, not like salvation, but like someone who needed reminding that she still had a choice. Sheriff Hargel wiped sweat from his collar. "If the girl consents." Clara inhaled, a small breath, but deep. Not to steady herself, to say goodbye. She nodded. Elias didn't move toward her, didn't take her hand. He just turned and walked down beside her. The earth burned through her soles, but she did not falter. They moved through the crowd, parting it like water over stone. No one spoke. No one dared stop a woman choosing her own end, or her own beginning. At the hitching post, Elias had 2 horses waiting. Clara paused. She looked at him. Didn't ask where they were going. She didn't need to know. She just needed to go. Away from the place that had taken her sisters her youth and her last thread of faith and justice. He handed her the reins. His fingers brushed hers, barely a touch, but in that heartbeat she knew he wasn't just offering escape. He was standing between her and the abyss. Behind them the town sank deeper into the sun. Ahead the horizon cracked open like a promise, fierce and unsure, but hers. The wind shifted as they rode away from Willow Creek, carrying with it the taste of dust and something else, something like endings. Clara rode in silence, her hands tight on the reins, the horse beneath her sensing every bit of her tension. She didn't speak. Elias didn't ask. There was nothing yet between them but the creak of leather and the rhythm of hooves. They rode through dry country past brittle scrub and hills browned by sun. Every so often Elias would glance her way, but she never turned to meet his eyes. The silence between them wasn't hostile. It was heavier than that, like fog before a storm. They reached the ridge just before noon. Below them, nestled among old pines and split boulders, stood Elias's cabin. It looked as though it had grown there over time, rather than being built. Wood-faded gray chimney, leaning a little roof mended with care and stubbornness. A thin trail of smoke rose from the flue. Elias dismounted first. He didn't offer to help her down, didn't speak, just waited nearby, reins in hand, until she slipped from the saddle. Clara's knees ached from the ride, but she didn't show it. She straightened her back, brushed the dust from her skirt, and followed him without a word. The cabin smelled of cedar ash and something faintly medicinal, like salve and solitude. Elias led her through the main room, spare but not unkind. A stove, a low shelf of well-worn books, a table, and 2 chairs. Light fell through the windows in sharp bars, dust swirling in their wake. He pushed open a door near the back. "This one's yours, if you want it." Clara stepped in. The bed was narrow but clean, a woven quilt, folded at its end. A vase on the sill held a few dried lavender stems. Someone had once tried to make it welcoming. Or maybe Elias had tried and hadn't realized he had. She turned to him. "Thank you." He gave a slight nod. "I'll be in the barn." And he left her there. That first day passed in quiet adjustment. Clara unpacked the few things she owned. Her mother's worn Bible, a small sewing kit, the handkerchief Josephine embroidered years ago. She didn't cry. She hadn't in a long time. She explored silently like one tiptoes through a stranger's story. She noted the scars on the floorboards, the places where chairs had worn grooves into the wood. The fireplace was clean but unused. Above it hung a single rifle, and nothing else. The mantel held no keepsakes, no portraits, but inside a drawer she found a wooden box, with its latch loose. Inside a small brooch, a child's ribbon, and a folded note with a name she didn't recognize. She closed it gently and didn't ask. At supper Elias cooked. Not well, but adequately. Beans, cornbread, boiled greens. He passed her a plate, without comment, and sat across from her, chewing slowly. Clara ate sparingly. She wasn't used to food that didn't come with tension. Afterward, they both sat on the porch each, with a tin cup of coffee in hand. The sun dipped low, casting long gold shadows across the clearing. Elias leaned against a post, one leg bent, arms resting on his thighs. "I've never had company out here," he said at last. Clara didn't reply right away. "You live alone, I do." No explanation. No apology. She sipped the bitter coffee, watched a hawk circle far above the treetops. "You built this place?" she asked. Elias nodded. "After I left the service." "What service?" He hesitated just a moment too long. "Scouting work. Long ago." She didn't press. She saw the way his shoulders tensed, how his hand tightened briefly around the cup. Whatever story lived behind those eyes, he wasn't ready to set it loose. Clara stood. "Thank you for supper." He inclined his head. "You're welcome." She paused at the door, one hand on the frame. "You don't need to explain anything, Elias." "Not yet." His eyes met hers, then gray, tired, but not closed. "I know," he said softly. Over the next few days a rhythm emerged. Clara cleaned. She tended the small herb bed. Behind the house mended a tear in one of Elias's old shirts. He worked the land, checked on the fencing, spent hours splitting wood and saying little. But in that quiet, something began to build. She noticed he never sang, not even under his breath. He noticed she hummed while gathering herbs, then fell silent when she realized he was near. She learned he drank his coffee black, always left one window cracked at night, and never touched the drawer where she'd found the brooch. He learned she stitched with precision, folded her clothes in perfect squares, and stared at the fire too long after dark. They spoke little, but not out of coldness. It was as though both were waiting for something, permission maybe, or simply time. One evening after a rain, Clara walked out to the edge of the clearing. The air smelled clean sharp, with pine and earth. She found Elias near the shed, oiling the hinges of the gate. "May I ask something?" she said. He paused, cloth in hand. "You can." "Who was Ellie Mae?" He stiffened, not enough for most to notice, but she did. "I saw her name on the note," she added. "I didn't mean to pry." He didn't answer, just stared at the ground for a long moment, then folded the cloth, once set it on the rail. "She was someone I failed," he said. Quiet, flat. Clara waited, but he said no more. "I understand," she said. "No," Elias replied, voice rough. "But thank you for pretending." She didn't press again. That night, Clara sat by the window in her room, watching the trees sway in the wind. She didn't know what had broken Elias Boone, but she could feel its edges in everything he didn't say. And strangely, she felt safer here, with all the silence and shadows, than she ever had back in town. In this place, at least, no one lied about what they were missing. And that for now was enough. The letter arrived tucked into a burlap satchel, slipped into the hands of a trader passing through. Clara found it folded inside her sewing basket one morning. Its parchment creased and the ink faded and rushed. She recognized the handwriting before she even opened it tight, careful with a slight leftward slant. Sister Agnes. Clara sat on the porch steps, morning light soft on her shoulders, and unfolded the paper with fingers that trembled before her heart did. "Dearest Clara Rose, I pray this reaches you wherever you are. Rumors say you were taken by a man who spoke for you instead of over you. If that is true, I thank the Lord. I write with urgency. Edith is alive but not well. She was sold to the Whitlock estate in Briar Hollow. I believe they keep her there against her will. She wrote to me once, smuggled through a kitchen maid. Her words were careful, clipped, but the fear in them bled through. Lavinia was seen in Copper Falls, working at a ledger house, under the name Miss Vale. Whether she is there by choice or force, I do not know. Lucy? I have no word of Lucy. I have done what I can. My place is here, but your heart is free to move. Be wise, be brave, with prayers and love." Sister Agnes. Clara read it 3 times, the first with disbelief, the second with a rush of heat, anger, grief, helplessness, the third with a stillness she didn't recognize. Something inside her, once buried, had begun to stand. She found Elias in the garden, coaxing growth from hard soil. He looked up as her shadow fell across the rows of sprouting herbs. "I need to go," she said simply. He straightened slowly, brush of dirt on his palms, eyes scanning her face. "Where Briar Hollow first, then Copper Falls. After that, wherever Lucy might be." He didn't reply right away. The silence stretched between them like rope. "I know it's dangerous," Clara added, softer now. "I know it's near impossible." Elias looked past her toward the line of pines. "You're not the kind to turn from near impossible." "No," she admitted. "I'm not." He nodded once, jaw tight. "Then you'll need help." Her breath caught. "You'll come." "I didn't say that," he replied, but something in his voice, quiet, resigned, sounded like yes. That evening she watched him patch saddle straps by lantern light. His hands moved with practiced care, the kind born of long rides and longer regrets. Clara folded bandages and herbs into linen wraps, her movements slow but steady. Neither spoke of what lay ahead. But the air was different now, charged not with fear, but purpose. Inside the cabin, she laid the letter on the table. The wind outside carried the smell of pine resin and faraway storms. The next morning they began gathering supplies. Elias took stock of their stores: flour, beans, coffee, dried jerky, oats. Clara listed what they would need. Beyond that, tinctures, blankets, spare boots, a compass, and paper. Not because she planned to write, but because she wanted to remember. They visited a trader's camp, 2 ridges south. Clara kept her shawl tight around her face. Elias said little, but traded well. He bartered for a second horse, lean, but sure-footed, and a pistol she noticed he handled with silent reluctance. On the way back, the sky turned copper with the setting sun. They rode side by side without words until the cabin came into view. At the door, Elias paused. "If we do this, there's no telling who we'll cross. I know. I don't want to see you hurt." Clara looked at him, then really looked the lines at his eyes, the way his shoulders carried weight that didn't belong to the present. "You won't," she said. "Not if I can help it." He gave a tight nod, stepped aside and let her pass. That night she dreamt of Lucy's laughter, light and full, like summer, and woke with tears she hadn't earned. Elias was already outside, sharpening a knife against the whetstone, his movements methodical. The sound carried into her bones. She brought him a cup of coffee. He took it without a word, but nodded in thanks. They sat again on the porch, as they often did now, with only the birds and wind for company. "I've known men who chase justice," Elias said suddenly. "Most of them die without catching it." Clara stared out at the trees. "Then we won't chase justice." He turned to her, brows slightly raised. "We'll chase what's ours," she said. "My sisters. My blood." A long pause. Then Elias set his empty cup down. "That's a reason I can ride behind." For the next 3 days, they prepared in quiet tandem. Elias reinforced the saddlebags. Clara dried roots for tea, packed clean rags. She wrote her sisters' names on a small square of cloth and tucked it into the lining of her coat, like a prayer. He repaired an old map. She stitched a tear in his coat. They didn't speak of fear, but it sat with them, polite, but present like a third traveler. On the morning of their departure, mist hugged the ground like a secret. The horses stomped lightly, sensing movement to come. Clara stepped outside with her satchel hair braided tight, shoulders squared. Elias was already mounted. He looked down at her, not as a stranger, not even as a savior, but as someone who had learned her silences. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I have to be." He extended a hand. She took it. And together, without ceremony, they rode into the gray, toward danger, toward truth, toward family. Not all things buried are lost. Some are just waiting to be found. Lavender Hollow emerged like a mirage, beneath the final light of the day, nestled in a valley fragrant with crushed herbs and wet grass. Clara had never seen such grandeur in the West. White fences, roses, climbing iron arches, and endless rows of lavender blooms. It looked torn from an English novel, not a place to imprison her sister. Elias rode beside her, silent. He hadn't spoken since they crossed the southern ridge, but Clara could feel his eyes never left the fence line. His hand occasionally brushing the saddle, like touching an old memory. A servant led them through the iron gate, etched with the initials M.H. Maribel Holloway, the mistress. She did not appear immediately. Edith sat beneath a wisteria-covered porch, dressed in pale silk, cradling a teacup. She looked still, as a portrait. "Clara?" Her voice was barely a breath, as if just saying her name could unravel everything. Clara stepped forward quickly. "I've come to take you home." Edith shrank slightly. "You shouldn't be here. You don't understand." "I'm fine now." "Fine," Clara echoed, looking closely at her sister's face. Something was wrong. A rigid smile, eyes always darting as though counting steps behind her. Footsteps clicked softly. A silver-haired woman in a lavender dress appeared. Lady Holloway smiled, as if greeting an old friend. "Miss Clara Rose Callahan, of course. We're delighted Edith has family visiting." Clara nodded politely. "I'd like to speak with my sister alone." "Of course. But first walk the garden with me for a moment. I think you'll see this is truly Edith's home." Elias met Clara's eyes. She understood. "Go along, listen." The garden was manicured to perfection, not a leaf out of place. But there were no birdsong, no laughter, only the cloying sweetness of lavender, mixed with a faint medicinal undertone. "We help young women stabilize their lives," Mrs. Holloway said, her eyes gliding over Clara like weighing her. "Many come here from trauma. They need structure. Edith is a shining example." "So she stays of her own will?" Clara asked, voice soft but edged. "Entirely." The woman smiled. "We keep no one against their will. But when they find safety, many don't want to leave." Clara nodded, though her heart chilled. No other girls in sight, no bustle, too ordered, too quiet. A young maid passed by, head down. Her eyes flicked toward Clara just long enough. It wasn't a free gaze. There was a bruise at her wrist, half hidden under a sleeve. Clara found Elias in the stables. "Something's wrong," she whispered. He didn't look surprised. "North wall has locks on the inside. I saw movement in the back, not through the gates. And the stable's latches old military kind. My sister told me to leave." Her eyes. "They're afraid." Clara clenched her fists. "She's trapped. Not with chains. With fear. With drugs." Elias nodded. "Then we need a plan." That evening, Clara returned to the main house, slipping past the kitchen wing. A servant girl had dozed off in the corner. Clara noticed a small vial of laudanum beside the tea tray. She hadn't meant to use it. Its mere presence was answer enough. Edith's room was slightly ajar. Her sister sat by the window, hugging her knees, the moon casting a long shadow. "I can't leave you here," Clara whispered. "Clara," Edith turned, a voice trembling. "You don't understand. You don't know what they do to those who try to run. I know. I've seen enough. I won't let them break you." Tears ran down Edith's cheeks, but still she said, "If I go, someone else takes my place. Maybe Lucy. Maybe another girl. If you stay, they'll still hurt someone. You don't stop evil by suffering for it." Clara squeezed her hand. "We leave. Tonight." At midnight, Clara guided Edith down the hall. Elias waited near the north fence, where he'd found a way out. The steward appeared suddenly in the shadows. Elias moved fast, pulled him aside, knocked him out with the butt of his pistol. No sound, no blood, just a body slumping. Clara pulled Edith along. Lights flared in the house. A bell rang. Dogs barked in the distance. They raced through the lavender fields, scent thick enough to choke. Clara's sleeve tore. Edith stumbled, but didn't stop. A horse came thundering out of the dark. "Elias, up." He lifted both women onto the saddle, wheeled the horse around. Behind them, torchlight flickered. Elias urged the horse toward the creek where they'd camped. Cold water surged under hoofbeats. The night swallowed them. They didn't stop until dawn broke. Edith slept in Clara's arms. Elias sat watchful beside the stream, silent in the early gold. "Thank you," Clara said softly. Elias didn't answer, but his gaze said more than words, an unspoken truth. They were no longer alone. When the sun rose, Edith stirred, her eyes still swollen from tears. They rested by the creek, the horses grazing nearby. Clara handed her a tin cup of water, waiting in silence. "Clara," Edith began, voice hoarse, "I need to tell you everything." Clara gave a small nod. Elias moved away, giving them space. Edith gripped her sister's hand. "Lavender Hollow isn't a place for healing. It's where the upper class sends women who are inconvenient, illegitimate daughters, unruly wives, exposed mistresses. I overheard them. They keep ledgers, lists, payments. They use laudanum to keep us docile. Anyone who resists disappears, like Marie, like Eliza." "You think Lucy?" Clara began. "She might be there, or somewhere like it. They rotate the girls." Clara went still. "We'll find her. I promise." Edith nodded, tears in her eyes. "With you, I believe that." Elias returned the morning light, catching on his shoulder like a soft golden shield. He didn't speak, but he had heard enough. And now they weren't just rescuing one sister. They were beginning something larger, the unraveling of a truth, hidden in lace and lavender. After the tense escape, from Lavender Hollow, the trio, Clara, Edith, and Elias, continued their journey toward Copper Falls. Lavinia was the next piece of the puzzle. and perhaps the most complicated. They paused atop a red-dusted hill, overlooking the mining town below, where smoke from chimneys curled like tired sighs, and golden light flickered from saloons along the main road. She once wrote that Benedict was the first man who truly listened to her. Edith whispered, her eyes shadowed with concern. Clara tightened the reins. Listening and keeping are not the same. Benedict's stone manor stood at the southern edge of Copper Falls, half veiled in ivy and half swallowed by silence. It didn't feel abandoned, just held in a hush, too polished like a stage, before the curtain rose. Lavinia met them at the gate, in a pale ash-colored silk dress, her hair coiled in soft, calculated waves. Her face was a perfect mask, lips curved in a half-smile, but her eyes didn't move with it. They stayed far off, like she was watching a dream she didn't belong in. Clara moved quickly to embrace her sister, arms open wide, heart full of longing. But Lavinia leaned back instead, the smile never faltering. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly. "He doesn't like surprises." "He?" Clara asked, but before the word could settle, he arrived. Benedict Shaw, poet, patron, manipulator. He emerged from the shadows of the entry hall like smoke, dressed in a pressed linen shirt sleeves, rolled with elegant carelessness. His smile was rehearsed, not in mirrors, but in audiences. His handshake lingered a second too long, on Clara's wrist. "Ah, family," he said. So rare to see the past return without a dagger. Dinner was served in the great hall, where the walls were lined with portraits, each a painting of Lavinia. Her face captured in oils, again and again, but always alone, always pale, always framed in winter light. No warmth, no laughter, just beauty made cold. Elias said nothing through the meal, but his fingers drummed once on the wood of the table, when Benedict quoted one of his own verses, "Let me bind you in silk, and I shall not need chains." Clara watched Lavinia closely. She never reached for her glass, never asked for anything. She waited, for a glance, for permission. Every move she made seemed choreographed to Benedict's breath. When she did speak, it was soft, scripted. And when Benedict recited another poem this time, about a bird with painted wings, who forgot how to fly, Clara saw Lavinia's hand flinch slightly beneath the table, then curl into a fist on her lap. No one else would have noticed, but Clara did. Elias did too. And for the first time, Clara saw not a woman who had chosen comfort over freedom, but a sister quietly drowning in golden silence. That night, in the cold stone corridor, Clara found Elias. The flickering oil lamp cast their shadows against the wall, two silhouettes heavy with tension. "I need to get into his library," Clara whispered, her hand clutching her shawl tightly. "Lavinia's trapped. She just doesn't know it yet." Elias didn't ask questions. He only gave a slow nod. "There's a side path, leads through the old shed. We'll need perfect timing." He slipped away without a sound, vanishing into the dark, like water soaking into earth. Clara waited in the empty sitting room, her heartbeat ticking with the clock. Then 3 soft taps against the window pane. A pebble. The signal. They had 10 minutes. The library sat at the north end of the manor, a deep, hushed room, the windows shrouded in velvet drapes. The air was thick with old paper ink and damp wood, pressing down like fog. Clara stepped inside, her shoulders, tense eyes scanning rows of towering shelves. At the center stood a black mahogany desk, polished to a mirror sheen. Elias waited near the door. He said nothing, but his gaze tracked her every breath. Clara moved to the desk, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the second drawer, the one least likely to be touched. Beneath piles of manuscript drafts, her hand found a leather-bound envelope, sealed in red wax. She opened it. A letter. The handwriting was delicate, almost poetic, but the meaning was sharp as ice. "Lavinia is the moon I've held long enough. After the spring festival, she will be transferred to Sparrow House, New Orleans. Templeton has accepted the terms." Clara's fingers dug into the edge of the page, leaving nail marks in the paper. Each line read like a wound. Lavinia wasn't loved. She was used, temporarily adored, then sold. Suddenly footsteps echoed just beyond the hallway. Elias raised a hand, silent. Then, with swift precision, he pulled Clara behind a tall bookcase. A servant entered, arms full of folded linens. He passed within inches of them. Clara pressed herself against the shelf, heart pounding so hard she feared it might be heard. Elias stood protectively in front of her shoulders, tense as drawn wire, one hand resting lightly on the knife at his side, just in case. Even after the servant left, they waited a few moments longer. Then Elias turned his gaze, meeting Clara's. In his eyes she saw more than concern. She saw pain, and a quiet fury for a world that kept selling its most beautiful souls for comfort and silence. The next morning, Clara stepped into Lavinia's room, while the sky was still pale with dawn. On the table by the window sat her poetry journal, ivory-bound, soft-spined, its pages filled with verses that read like breaths, caught in silk. Clara didn't write much, just a small slip of paper tucked gently between two unfinished lines. If this is love, why must it cost your freedom? No plea, no confrontation. Just a question left in the one place Lavinia still called home. Evening came quietly. Candlelight flickered along the drawing-room walls. The piano hummed softly in the distance. But Clara felt it, the slow tightening in her chest, the heaviness of footsteps she hadn't yet heard. When the door creaked open behind her, she knew. Benedict entered, tall and composed, as if walking onto a stage set to his design. He wasn't angry. He smiled, a slow, curved smile, polished like a silver blade. "You thought yourself clever," he said, slipping one hand into the pocket of his coat. "Lavinia gave me your note." Behind him, Lavinia appeared. She wore a pale dress, like winter's breath, her head bowed, her eyes fixed on the floor. She stood like something carved in marble, beautiful still, and cracked somewhere deep within. Clara felt her breath catch. A hollow bloomed in her chest. Her voice broke. Elias stepped forward, his gaze sharp, cold. His fingers brushed the grip of his revolver, not as a threat, but as habit. "Ready? Always?" Benedict raised a calm hand, the gesture almost theatrical, but there was steel in his gaze. "No need for blood," he said. "So long as you leave, now. And you don't take my muse with you." Lavinia remained silent, but Clara, watching her sister closely, saw it. Her hand clenched the hem of her dress until her knuckles turned white. Her shoulders held like they were pinned by nails. She had betrayed them, but not without pain. In that moment, Clara felt no anger, only sorrow, because she understood Lavinia wasn't yet ready to leave the gilded cage, the one where love came dressed in poetry, but never let her breathe as herself. "I only wanted to help," Clara cried, her voice cracking at the edges. The room froze. The lamplight flickered, casting long shadows on the walls, shadows stretched by rising fury. "Help!" Benedict snapped, his eyes like slivers of glass. He yanked Lavinia's arm hard, making her stumble. "She belongs to me. She knows her place better than any muse ever could." Lavinia didn't scream, but her eyes widened, and in the brass mirror on the far wall, she caught the reflection of Alice, the young maid, standing silently behind her face, pale hands trembling like leaves in winter. In Alice's fear, Lavinia saw her truth. No more poetry, no more pretty metaphors. This was not love. This was possession wrapped in silk words and flickering candlelight. Benedict kept speaking, voice sharp, as a sermon. "You think your sister can save you. You'll go where who will love what's already been sold besides me." But Lavinia wasn't listening anymore. Her hand tightened around the hidden shape beneath her sleeve. Cool, slender steel tucked there hours ago beneath layers of violet silk. In one breathless instant, she drew the fruit knife and swung. A red line bloomed across Benedict's arm. He roared, stumbling backward, blood splashing onto the polished floor. His eyes blazed with betrayal, like a predator wounded not by a rival, but by its own prize. Clara surged forward, grabbing Lavinia's wrist. Elias burst through the rear entrance, revolver raised. Alice, pale but fierce, threw open the door as Edith appeared outside, horses already waiting in the shadows. Lavinia didn't look back. No apologies, no farewells. Only her eyes, steady, clear, alive with a fire that hadn't burned in years. Behind them, Benedict's screams faded into the cold stone of the manor, swallowed by silence and smoke. Now Elias growled under his breath, eyes scanning like an arrow loosed through the dark. In the distance, crack. A small but sharp explosion rang out, Edith. At the far end of the estate, near the stables, a controlled fire leapt from a torch, hidden in the dry hay. Flames bloomed, licking the wooden beams, casting long, jagged shadows across the yard. Smoke billowed upward, thick and bitter, filling the night air with the scent of ash and urgency. Servants shouted in alarm. Some ran for water buckets, others for help. Benedict, clutching his bleeding arm, screamed commands, but his voice vanished into the chaos, like dust into wind. Clara clutched Lavinia's wrist tightly and pulled her away from the manor's front, toward the narrow stone alley in the back. Alice followed her, wide eyes brimming with fear, but her feet unwavering. "Go," Clara urged, her voice nearly cracking under pressure. Elias brought up the rear. He didn't speak, just raised his arm and fired a shot into the air. The crack of gunfire split the smoke and shouted louder than words. No one dared follow. The horses waited. Edith stood beside them, reins in hand, jaw set like flint. Clara hoisted Lavinia onto the saddle behind her. Edith helped Alice up onto her mount. Elias vaulted onto his own horse, muscles taut, sweat glinting on his neck, gaze locked on the burning outline of the manor. They rode. Hoofs pounded against Copper Falls's cobbled streets, echoing like war drums. Behind them the fire spread, lighting up the sky in furious red. Benedict's scream mingled with the roar of flames, a mad poet's waltz, ending in his own orchestration of ruin. Clara didn't look back, but her arms wrapped tight around Lavinia, not just to keep her steady, but as a quiet promise. "You're free now." Lavinia leaned against her sister's back, tears slipping silently across chilled cheeks. Alice clung to Edith, muffling a sob into her shoulder. Elias said nothing, but as he cast one last glance toward the flames, there was no rage in his eyes, only the silence of a man who had seen too many fires destroy the most fragile things. They stopped, just as dawn brushed the edge of the sky, the early light spilling like pale milk through the still pines. A shallow hollow was chosen for camp, tucked between an old oak and tall grass, still slick with dew. The campfire crackled softly, casting warm flickers across dust-worn faces marked by fatigue and the weight of a long night. Lavinia sat close beside Clara, her shoulders trembling beneath a thin blanket, breath short and steady, as if afraid to stir the memories still smoldering inside her. "He made me feel like a goddess," Lavinia whispered, eyes fixed on the fire, "but only so he could lock me away in his temple." Clara reached out gently, wrapping her fingers around her sister's hand, a silent rhythm of comfort. "You saved yourself," she said quietly. "I just knocked on the door." Lavinia turned, her eyes rimmed red, but clear now. In that moment, with ash still clinging to the hem of her dress, Clara saw her little sister truly return. A few steps away, Elias sat against the trunk of a tree, his back straight, eyes watching the distant horizon. He didn't speak. Occasionally his gaze drifted back to the three sisters, counting their quiet breaths, like a man keeping inventory of a fragile peace. There was a soldier's wariness in his posture, but also something softer, like a man who for the first time in years allowed himself to hope. Edith sat close to the fire, arms wrapped around Alice, who had fallen asleep curled against her. The girl's breath came evenly, one hand still clutching the edge of Edith's coat, like a lifeline. Edith stroked her hair slowly, gently, eyes thoughtful and heavy, as if touching something she'd once lost. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, three Callahan sisters sat beneath the same sky, beside a fire that didn't threaten to consume them. But dawn's light didn't just warm the present. Somewhere out there in silence, none of them dared disturb, one sister still remained, Lucy. And their journey was far from over. They arrived at Maple Estate, just as the morning mist still clung to the ground, a vast property hidden behind ancient oaks, its white stone walls draped in ivy. Clara, Edith, Elias, and Lavinia rode quietly along the gravel path, each heart beating with a different rhythm of hope and dread. Edith whispered, "Lucy lives here, with Jeremiah Cobb, a wealthy gentleman." Clara felt her chest tighten. We followed so many shadows. Let's hope this time it's light. The housekeeper led them into a sunlit conservatory. Roses floated in crystal vases. Jeremiah stood by the window, tall, composed. Beside him, Lucy smiled, radiant and serene, her hair glowing golden in the light. For a moment, everything stilled, like the opening notes of a dreamlike waltz. Clara stepped forward. Still smiling, Lucy said, "Clara, Edith, I've waited so long." She embraced them both, her arms warm, and tears fell silently. Jeremiah placed a gentle hand on her back and courteously offered Clara a cup of tea. The atmosphere was too perfect, too peaceful like a dream, too beautiful to be true. After a gentle welcome and a warm meal on the conservatory porch, Lucy took Clara and Edith by the hand and led them to the back garden. Lavinia followed, cautious but silent. Elias came last, keeping his usual distance, though his eyes never strayed far from Lucy's every small gesture. The apple orchard greeted them with the sweet scent of ripened fruit, crimson and gleaming beneath the afternoon sun. The trees stood in neat rows, the soil carefully turned, not the wild, rugged style of frontier farms, but a corner of nature, shaped by someone with both means and tenderness. Jeremiah appeared beside Lucy, gently draping a shawl over her shoulders. "Lucy is the soul of this place," he said, pride shining in his eyes. "I call this garden the gentle dawn, because she brought a soft light into my darkest hours." Lucy blushed, smiling shyly, but looked genuinely happy. She walked over to a tree, with L&J carved into the bark, then turned back toward the group. "We plan to plant pears next," she said, eyes sparkling, "and maybe start a small retreat for orphaned children. Do you remember the old shelter by Willow Creek, Clara? I want to recreate that. A safe place. A fresh beginning." Clara stood still, her breath caught somewhere between memory and disbelief. The breeze tugged a few loose strands of hair across her cheek, but she didn't brush them away. There was something so earnest, so crystal clear in Lucy's voice. Before her stood the same little sister who used to cry into her arms on freezing nights. Now speaking of apples and children and sanctuary, like a woman who'd found a home for her soul. "Stay," Lucy said softly. "All of us. Let's leave the past behind. We could start again here." Clara didn't answer right away, but Edith reached for her hand, and Lavinia blinked, as if touched by something soft deep within her. From a distance, Elias watched Lucy for a long moment. He said nothing, but Clara noticed in his eyes there was both suspicion and the faintest glimmer of hope. Hope that perhaps for once their journey might not end in tears and fire. Night fell over Maple Estate, like a soft velvet curtain, cloaking everything in a gentle, deceptive calm. A crescent moon hung low above the tree line, casting shadows through the window, where Clara lay restless on the guest bed. Everything was too perfect: the clean room, the lavender-scented pillows, the distant song of crickets, but it was that very perfection that kept her awake. Lucy had spoken with unwavering conviction, had looked at Clara with the eyes of someone stepping into a new chapter of life. And yet, something felt wrong. A flicker in Lucy's gaze, a slight shiver when Jeremiah touched her hand. Barely a breath, but Clara had seen it. Without even a shawl, she slipped from the room, her steps as quiet as wind through leaves. She crossed the polished wood hallway, slipped out the back door, toward the carriage shed, where Lucy and Jeremiah had disappeared earlier that evening. Halfway there, she stopped. Someone else was ahead, moving silently, avoiding the moonlight just like her. Clara ducked behind a tree, holding her breath. It was Elias. He walked with his head low, his stride steady but slow. His fingers brushed the wood siding and latches, the habitual movement of a scout, reading signs in silence. He paused before the barn door, his eyes scanning the small window above, then leaned in and pressed his ear gently to the wooden wall. Clara felt her heart race. Elias, the ever-calm, ever-guarded Elias, was suspicious too. She stepped from behind the tree. In the moonlight, her shadow joined his. Elias didn't startle. He simply turned his eyes, meeting hers in the misty stillness. "You couldn't sleep either?" he said, voice low. As the night wind, Clara nodded. I saw Lucy flinch when Jeremiah touched her. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled a crumpled scrap of paper from inside his coat, retrieved from the back door of the barn. She guessed. Clara unfolded it. A list. Lucy's name lay in the middle, beneath the line, paid in full. Templeton and Cobb. She looked up at Elias, her face paling. Templeton? His mother, she whispered. Elias nodded. And the woman who runs that charity church network in New Orleans. Rumor says she rehabilitates fallen women. Clara let go of the paper. It drifted on the wind, snagging in a bush like a guilt that refused to stay buried. She's been sold, Clara murmured again. Elias looked at her for a long time. No comfort, no avoidance. The next morning, Clara sat on the back steps of the house, early sunlight spilling across the porch roof, casting long shadows on the stone tiles. She turned a porcelain cup slowly in her hands. The tea inside had long gone cold, not because the air was chilly, but because her heart was. Lucy appeared in the doorway, her silk dress fluttering lightly in the breeze, bare feet gliding soundlessly across the floorboards. You're up early, she said, smiling like the morning sun. Clara didn't answer at once. She looked at her sister, the same face, the same voice, but no longer the Lucy of the wooden porch, back home of nights, sharing crusts of bread and lullabies, whispered in the dark. Lucy, she said slowly, do you truly believe Jeremiah loves you? Lucy hesitated, just a moment. But then she smiled again, eyes glistening, as if catching morning light. He's gentle with me. He listens to my poetry. He respects where I've been without judgment. And his mother, Clara asked. Lucy drew her hands from the shawl around her shoulders. She lives far away. He said he'd cut ties if I ever asked him to. Clara stayed silent. Then, wordlessly, she placed the crumpled piece of paper into Lucy's open palm. Her name. Beneath the name, Templeton. Lucy read it, her hands trembling. Then she folded the paper shut, saying nothing. He didn't choose you, Lucy, Clara said softly. He traded you to reclaim land inheritance. You're not his muse, you're a transaction. Lucy's eyes darkened. First blankness, then anger, and finally shame. No, that can't be. He's already signed. You'll disappear just like we all disappeared from each other. Lucy stood abruptly, turned, and walked away without a word. Clara didn't follow. She didn't need to. In that hurried stride, she saw it clearly. Lucy believed her. And in the fleeting glance Lucy cast back, Clara saw the very thing she had waited all night to find, the spark of defiance. Night fell once more, bringing with it a taut silence, like a string pulled too tight. Everything at the estate seemed unchanged. The soft hum of insects, the warm glow of lantern light behind curtains, Jeremiah calmly pouring a drink in his study, and Lucy still smiling. She smiled as always, but this time there was no innocence in her eyes. Clara stood at the upstairs window with Elias and Edith. The three held their breath, watching from a distance. Are you sure about this? Clara whispered. Elias answered for her. If Lucy keeps her nerves, we need exactly 3 minutes. Lucy entered the barn, where Jeremiah was inspecting some old furniture. She wore the violet velvet dress. He once praised her hair loose, as it had been when they first met. Jeremiah, she called softly. I want to show you something, a portrait I just found me before I met you. He turned, raising an eyebrow, then nodded and followed her deeper into the shadows. The moment his back was turned, Lucy slid the bolt, slammed the door shut, and locked the iron clasp. Lucy, he called, voice tightening. She said nothing. Her hands trembled, but her eyes blazed like fire. From her pocket she drew a cloth, soaked in oil, and struck a match. Jeremiah lunged, pounding the door. You've lost your mind. Open this now. You've already burned too many dreams, Lucy replied, her hand hovering over the flame. Now it's my turn. Just then, Elias rushed in from behind, axe in hand. One blow, 2 flames erupted as the door splintered open. Clara grabbed Lucy, pulling her free. Edith waited with the horses. The fire devoured the barn. Jeremiah collapsed, choking in the smoke, as the 3 women and Elias galloped away under the moonlight, leaving behind not just an estate, But the years of deception that came with it, Lucy clung to Clara, tears lost in the wind. I'm not an illusion anymore, she whispered. For the first time, I chose myself. Willow Creek appeared before them, under a haze of dust, the evening sun stretching long shadows across the roofs of faded timber houses, like the ghost of an old dream. The main street remained the same bent lampposts, the old blacksmith shop, boarded up, and the scent of leather mingled with dry grass. But it wasn't the town that had changed. It was the ones returning. Clara reined in her horse before the old Callahan house heart, heavy with a feeling she couldn't name. The house stood weathered and worn, its peeling paint and sagging roof, bearing witness to years of absence. But this was the place where girls once split the last crust of bread, where laughter had echoed even in winters without firewood. She dismounted first. Lavinia followed her gaze, tracing the porch roof, as if measuring time itself. Edith helped Lucy down, holding her firmly, not just from lingering injury, but from a deeper, quieter hurt. Inside, dust clung to every corner, but memories still clung stronger. The lace curtains their mother had sewn still swayed in the window. The old rocking chair Edith once used to lull Clara to sleep stood crooked, creaking, like a voice calling from the past. Lucy silently placed a bundle of dried lavender on the old altar. Lavinia brushed off the windowsill and sat without a word, eyes fixed on the distant hill where they once played. Edith kindled a fire, the flame catching slowly, but enough to warm the kitchen's heart. And Clara peeled a late-season apple, the blade sliding slowly through the skin, as if each slice could ease the weight in her chest. No one spoke much. Lavinia flinched when the wind moaned through the rafters, as if some ghost still lingered. Lucy glanced over her shoulder now, and then her eyes caught in something no one else could see. Edith busied herself as always, though her hand trembled when it touched old wood. Clara remained steady, yet it was clear her gaze never stopped searching for what had been lost or for the peace they'd once known, four sisters. At last, together, but none untouched, and none knowing what would come next. Beneath the warped roof and fading walls, they began to relearn the act of living. In this house of memories, every corner seemed to whisper, "We survived. But can we begin again?" After all they had endured, once the four Callahan sisters were safely reunited under their old roof, it was Elias who quietly stepped away. He left no grand goodbye, just a folded note on the kitchen table, penned in his neat, silent hand. "Clara, you owe me nothing. You have your family now. Start over. Live." Clara read it 3 times before folding it tight and tucking it into her blouse. She said nothing to her sisters. But since that day, a hollow ache had opened in her chest, echoing with every hour that passed without him. "You think that sets me free," she muttered days later, peeling apples at the window. But her knife kept slipping, and her hands trembled slightly. Elias wasn't gone. He had just chosen not to stay. She tried to drown herself in small tasks, cleaning the loft with Edith, helping Lucy season preserves, watching Lavinia slowly adjust to sunlight again. But each evening her eyes drifted west, toward the tree line Elias once described, with a quiet fondness. Somewhere beyond those hills, his cabin waited alone. By the 4th day, she could take no more. At dawn, Clara saddled a borrowed mare and rode out, steam curling from her breath in the cold. She carried a satchel of herbs, ginger root, a flask of warm water. She didn't know what she would say when she found him. She only knew she had to. His cabin appeared like a ghost. Through the trees, cloaked in early mist, paint peeled from the wood siding. The front door hung slightly ajar. Clara stepped inside. The scent of smoke and mildew hit her first. Then she saw him curled on a narrow cot by the hearth, a quilt damp with sweat twisted around his legs. His face was flushed, the bandage on his shoulder yellowed and seeping. He shivered even as his skin burned. "Elias," she cried, rushing to his side. His brow was blazing hot under her palm. He stirred faintly, mumbling Clara. She knelt beside him, hands fumbling with the edge of his shirt, peeling away cloth that clung to the wound. She cleaned it gently, pressing cool compresses to his face and throat. Her voice shook as she whispered, "I was only gone a few days. And look at you." His breath was ragged. In fevered murmurs, he spoke to someone far away. "Don't let her get in the wagon. Ellie Mae, please." Clara froze. The name pierced the air like a crack of thunder. "Ellie Mae," she whispered. "Who is she?" "Elias." No answer came, only a faint groan, then a whisper through cracked lips. "The girl I couldn't save. She had hair like yours. And that look, like you were seeing something I couldn't." Clara's chest tightened. All those nights they'd traveled side by side. All the glances, the distance he kept, the quiet way he carried her burdens, but never shared his own. Now she understood. He hadn't just saved her. He'd been trying to save someone else too, someone lost long ago. "You left me," she said softly, wringing out the cloth. "Because of her, didn't you?" Elias nodded faintly, a silent confession. "You think I needed a hero," Clara continued. "But I never did. I needed someone real, someone who hurts, who fails, who stays." His eyes, glassy and rimmed with pain, met hers. "Elias," she whispered, taking his hand. "I don't need saving, but maybe you do." That night, Clara didn't leave. She sat beside him through the fever, changing the cloth, humming old lullabies their mother used to sing. The wind howled outside, tapping against the cabin walls, like the past trying to come in. But in that space between them, something else had begun. Not rescue, not redemption, just the first breath of forgiveness. As dawn crept through the slatted window, its soft light touched Tobias's face. Tobias, the name Clara had quietly given Elias in her heart. His skin no longer burned with fever. The pallor had lifted slightly. He stirred, eyelids shut tight, then slowly blinked open, like a man emerging from years of darkness into sudden light. Clara still sat beside the bed, her hand wrapped around his, not merely in care, but as if letting go, for even a second would break something fragile they had just begun to build. In that moment there were no words, only a quiet exchange of glances, not to seek answers, but to acknowledge something unspoken that had long lived between them, as if they both felt their hearts beating in a rhythm that didn't belong to silence anymore. "You didn't just save me," Clara whispered, her voice as soft as autumn wind. "Maybe I'm here to save you too." Elias turned his face toward the window, his breath shallow before he spoke. "I never said it aloud, because I thought if I did, the image you had of me would crumble. I'm afraid of myself too." Clara didn't let go, but she did close her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She had once seen Elias as a boulder, unmoved in a desert storm. But now she saw him for what he was, a man, weathered by the winds, struggling to stand. "I'm not afraid," she said quietly, tilting her face and pressing a small kiss to his hand. "You're not a rock. You're a man standing in the wind. And I'm here to hold you steady." Silence outside. The wind whispered through the slats, brushing against the walls like a memory unspoken. Slowly Elias murmured, "I used to live in silence. A year ago, in the morning fog of Dust Creek, I failed to save a girl. Her hair caught the dawn light, the same way yours does, her eyes like yours. I reached for her, and she slipped through. I knelt in the reeds waiting for her to return. But she never did." Clara listened each word, a needle stitching through the wound he had buried. The man who had knelt for a lost girl now bowed, not to beg for forgiveness, but to allow himself to receive it. "And I kept thinking," he paused, "that if I could just keep you close, maybe that would be enough to forget the pain." Clara shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, I don't want you to forget. Just like we shouldn't hide the hurt anymore." She ran her fingers along his collarbone, where the heat of the infection had cooled. "You are who you are, with every crack and every mistake. You saved me already. Now, let me save you." Outside, the light turned gold. Inside, they remained quiet, but their faces had softened more than any word ever could. The morning sunlight streamed through the window of Elias's home, casting a soft golden hue across the small room, a clear sign that the fevered nights of darkness and despair had come to an end. Elias had returned not just in health, but changed. He smiled more easily now, and his eyes sought Clara's every time she stepped close. Today he brought her back to Willow Creek. The gate creaked shut behind them, and the sisters came rushing out to greet them. Lavinia was the first, throwing her arms around Clara. Edith placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and Lucy stood, with trembling lips, joy shining in her eyes. Elias stayed back, not inserting himself, just watching quietly, his lips curling into a smile he didn't even realize was there. Then from the end of the dusty road came the sound of a single horse's hooves, fast but hesitant, like the rider was pulling each step from memory. All eyes turned. It was Josephine. She wore a wrinkled travel dress, hair unkempt, face smudged with dust, and eyes shimmering like cracked glass. When her horse stopped before the gate, she didn't dismount right away. Only when Clara stepped forward and reached out her hand did Josephine slide off the saddle, almost collapsing into her sister's embrace. Lucy grasped her hand. "You're alive. You're still you." Josephine nodded, eyes red. "I thought I'd chosen right. A family, a promised husband. But it was all illusion. They needed a bride, a mother, a stand-in. I was no longer myself." Edith squeezed her hand. And then, one morning I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the eyes staring back. I missed you all. Missed the grass behind our house, the crackle of the hearth, Lavinia singing nonsense tunes. I was scared but more afraid of living in a dream someone else had written for me. She turned to Clara. "I remembered what you told me. Sometimes freedom begins by saying no to the easiest path. I did that." Lucy smiled and pulled her into the embrace of all four sisters. "We're sisters," she whispered. "None of us gets left behind." Elias, still standing behind them, didn't step into their circle. But Clara turned back, eyes meeting his, and her smile broke open like sunlight through storm clouds. In that moment he knew he wasn't just the man who had stood guard over these women. He was part of their family now. Before the dawn had fully lifted, Willow Creek stirred with unexpected urgency. The sound of hooves rattling across packed dirt shattered the morning hush as a well-armed party rode through the gate. Their leader, a tall woman, with an air of authority and cold intent, dismounted swiftly, her long coat catching the early light. "By order of Mrs. Templeton," she declared, pulling a heavy parchment from her coat pocket, "the property known as the Callahan sisters is to be seized and returned." Her voice rang out like a verdict, and suddenly Willow Creek felt like a court of accusation. Clara and her sisters, Edith, Lavinia, Lucy, and newly returned Josephine, stood firm. Each face bore the weight of past horrors, but there was no fear in their eyes. They were not thieves, they were survivors. And this was their reckoning. Among the riders, Deputy Henry Pike watched closely. He'd once admired Clara from afar, a young woman of promise he couldn't quite reach. Now he saw something stronger in her quiet courage, facing injustice. Mrs. Templeton spoke of charity, influence, and lineage, but Pike sensed an unsaid motive behind her claim. His gaze flicked between the parchment and the sisters standing before him, and his brow furrowed. Justice, he knew, wasn't simply obeying orders. It required truth. By midday, the wide dirt area outside the Callahan home had transformed into an ad hoc meeting place. Planks of wood served as benches. Men and women from the town gathered in hushed clusters, curious and fearful of what would unfold. Mrs. Templeton entered with a host of aides. She raised the parchment again. "This property, lost property, claim it." Murmurs rustled through the crowd. Clara stepped forward, her sisters forming a silent line behind her. Elias stood just behind Clara, expression resolute. Clara unfolded a handful of papers and evidence. She spoke plainly but firmly. "Mrs. Templeton alleges she's reclaiming stolen property. But the truth is she trafficked us, sold us to powerful families for her own gain. Edith was forced into servitude. Lavinia manipulated. Lucy abused. I nearly bound to a marriage I never chose. Josephine promised to one she'd never met. We are not property. We are people." From her kerchief, Clara produced fragments of proof. A letter from Lavender Hollow's overseers, confirming forced confinement. Lucy held up her journal open to entries of silent pleas. Josephine presented a frayed ribbon from her wedding dress. Evidence she was a bride, in name only. Elias stepped forward and displayed a ring Mrs. Templeton's offering to Lucy on the first day at Maple Estate. Its inscription, "For charity's sake." Now it stood exposed as a bribe, not a gift. The crowd shifted. Fear and pity spread through the onlookers. Deputy Pike emerged from the back of the crowd. He lifted his voice so all could hear. "I am Henry Pike, deputy of Willow Creek. I swore to uphold justice, not lineage or wealth. If Mrs. Templeton has legal proof of stolen property, she must produce it here. What we've heard today is testimony and evidence pointing to violation, not theft." He paused, looking toward Clara. "This community will not turn a blind eye to exploitation." Mrs. Templeton stiffened her mouth a thin line. "I will take my evidence when and where it's lawful." Clara stepped forward again, voice stronger. "We don't want riches. We want our freedom, our dignity. Charity draped in chains is still slavery." A few voices rose in support. Her sister's eyes shone. Elias offered her a small nod, pride shining in his gaze. Silence settled. The deputies stepped in, securing Mrs. Templeton's documents. She scoffed, turned on her heel, and mounted her horse. She looked back once at Clara, her glare freezing the air between them. "This isn't over," she hissed before galloping away. Horse hooves faded into the distance, carrying the weight of a promise not yet fulfilled. Clara exhaled, her sisters gathering around her. They did not cheer. They were not free yet, but justice had taken its first step. Deputy Pike rested a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Truth won here today," he murmured. Elias squeezed her hand tightly. They stood together in that muddy field, Willow Creek at their backs. The sun, now fully risen, bathed them in warm light. Laughter rose quietly among them, soft, relieved, but not unburdened. Justice had begun to ride with them, but they knew the road ahead was still fraught. And as dawn warmed their faces, they felt it. Deep freedom requires courage, and justice must be earned, with truth at first light. Morning light filtered through the lace curtains in Clara's bedroom, casting delicate patterns across the floorboards. Elias had stayed overnight, 2 cups of tea cooling beside an unmade bed. Today the air smelled of dew and healing dust, a promise of fresh starts. They sat across from each other at the small table by the window. Elias held out a small velvet-lined box. Inside rested a ring, a simple band of silver, polished smooth, stamped with impressions of worn spoon tines. He had melted down his old army-issued spoon to forge it himself. "This was one of the only things I had left from before," he said quietly, voice gentle as the breeze. "I wanted you to have it, not as a token of rescue, but of partnership. In every choice we make, in every dawn, we meet together." Clara's breath caught. She reached out, sliding the ring onto her finger. The silver band reflected the light circling her finger like a quiet vow. "It's beautiful," she murmured, "because it came from your hands." His eyes softened. "Because it comes from a promise that I will stand by your side, not because I saved you, but because we choose to walk together." Slowly, intentionally, they rose. Hands found one another. Their first kiss wasn't urgent or breathless, but rich with shared stories, smoke and dust and tears and laughter. It was the kind of moment that came only when 2 hearts had been tempered by fire and found strength in one another. Weeks passed, and Willow Creek began to shift and settle into something new. The fight for justice had set things in motion, but now it was time for rebuilding for each of them. Edith reopened the little room at the back of their home as a medical refuge. The wood floorboards were scrubbed clean. A pot of herbs simmered on the stove, and a battered medical satchel, once belonging to a traveling physician, lay open on the table. She treated scrapes, fevers, and broken spirits alike. Clara watched as her once silent sister comforted a crying child, her hands gentle yet certain. Lavinia, her creative spark renewed, began gathering neighbors under a grove of oak trees. There, surrounded by morning birdsong, she held her first poetry reading. She read lines about resilience and reclamation, each verse infused with the memory of what they'd endured and how they'd risen. Her audience clapped softly, moved and deeply inspired. Lucy, ever the fighter, hit the dusty stacks of law books borrowed from the county seat. She practiced filing petitions, drafting letters, demanding reform. She cross-referenced land laws, estate rights protections against forced confinement. Even at night, her candle's flame burned bright, reflecting the fire in her mind. Josephine welcomed children to learn embroidery and basic farm skills. She taught them, find what you love, and then shack off what expects you to be less than yourself. Clara's heart. Elias's anchor. Sometimes Clara found Elias sitting quietly in the orchard behind their home, examining sprouting seedlings. The early shoots bore promise, just as Clara and Elias had grown together from moments of shared vulnerability into a bond neither had expected. One afternoon he invited Clara to walk the fence line with him. The crisp breeze rustled the tall prairie grasses. He stopped beside her, gently tipping her chin toward the sun. Look at how the land responds, he said softly. It nurtures the small things, the fragile things, into something stronger than we can imagine. She looked at him, aware of how much had changed since that fevered night by the hearth. We are like that, she whispered. We grew in the broken places. Elias wrapped his arm around her. We did this together. Months later, a quiet harvest celebration was held in the clearing behind their home. Buckets of fresh-picked apples, jugs of herbal tea, and plates of simple cakes lined the tables. The whole community gathered under strings of lanterns, orange and warm, against the encroaching dusk. Edith offered medical advice and comfort with a confident smile. Lavinia read a new poem, this time about kindness and kinship. Lucy stood at her own desk, helping neighbors file forms, answering questions about their rights. Even Clara gave a short speech, her voice steady. And to those who said we were property, who tried to chain our bodies or our choices, she said, eyes on the lanterns swaying above, we rise now, as free women, as sisters, mothers, wives, standing in our own names. Among the crowd, Elias watched her, his chest tight with pride. After Clara finished, he stood and joined her on the small wooden platform. He raised his hand gently, drawing hers up. She squeezed his fingers. Together, he said. Together, she echoed. As the celebration wound down, Clara and Elias stepped out into the courtyard. A soft breeze danced around them, carrying laughter and music to the dark edges of the land. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, fingers tracing the silver band. This, she said, is the life I hoped for, one we built rather than one we were given. Elias squeezed her hand. And it's only the beginning. That night, beneath the wide-open prairie sky, the wind whispered through the grass, and for every gentle rustle, the land seemed to murmur their names. Clara, Elias, Edith, Lavinia, Lucy, Josephine. Names no longer carried burdened echoes of captivity, but of breath, freedom, and home. The world outside Willow Creek lay hushed under its first winter blanket, glistening white, draping every fence post, every bare branch, every footpath, once trodden by dust and dreams. The sun rose, muted its silver light, catching the swirl of snowflakes dancing in the cold morning air. Inside the Callahan home, now warm and full, the fireplace crackled with a gentle insistence, as though it understood tonight was one of significance. Clara stood by the hearth, shifting in a comfortable woolen dress. She had felt the flicker of new life inside her since last night, but the hush of dawn confirmed it. New beginnings don't wait for perfect timing. She placed a hand over her belly, breathing slowly so as not to disturb the quiet. Elias, she called softly, voice carrying like a prayer into the next room. He emerged from the bedroom, brushing his dark hair from his forehead. The snow's reflection in his eyes made him look twice as gentle. Clara didn't speak. She only opened her hands toward him, palms up, revealing warmth that went deeper than words. Elias paused. His breath caught somewhere between wonder and fear. Then his gaze traveled from Clara's face down to her belly, as though for confirmation. Tears glimmered at the corners of his eyes. Surprise, relief, joy, humility, all tangled in their brilliance. He closed the distance and sank to one knee in the fluttering firelight. You're with child, he whispered, disbelief laced with hope. Clara nodded, tears of her own lighting, like hearth glow. His fingers hovered at her waist, then rested softly atop the curve of new life. I'm going to be a father, he repeated, voice trembling more than his knees. "Yes," came her whisper, warm, unwavering, full of promise. "We're building a family." Elias leaned in, pressing a kiss to her belly, before lifting his face to hers. The tears fell freely, then tracing his cheekbones as he gently took her hands. He began, turning away, so she wouldn't see the raw emotion. "I never believed I deserved this." Clara stepped forward, closing the last distance, holding him against her. "But you do. You deserve love, a home, a child, and I'll stand by you every step." He pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her warmth as if it were breath he'd lost long ago. Weeks passed, and that first snow became steady, blanketing roofs and hollows. The old Callahan house, once patched to house their small family, took on new life. Under Clara's careful leadership and the support of Elias and the sisters, it began its transformation into Willow Haven, a refuge for women who, like them, had lost themselves to systems that used them, silenced them, controlled them. Edith organized the cleanup, gathering medicines and blankets. Lavinia decorated walls, with her poetry lines of phoenixes rising and storms yielding spring. Lucy filed papers, property agreements and charters, and agreements that made the house theirs and theirs alone. Josephine found the children's corner, filling it with simple wooden toys and soft fabrics, hope in tangible form. And Elias, he cleared a small plot near the orchard, so Clara, when she could walk outdoors, would have room to breathe in the morning light with their child. One late afternoon, the four sisters and Clara each held a corner of a thick quilt. They stood outside, snow falling softly, as Elias hammered the last nail in the sign above the door. Willow Haven, a place of shelter, a place of hope. Clara handed Elias a steaming cup of cider. He smiled, part father, part husband, part protector, the shape of his future now drawn in ribbons and worn work boots. "Come inside," she said softly. He closed his eyes at the warmth of her presence. Inside, the living room glowed with lantern light and winter charm. Soft rugs cushioning wooden floors. Willow Haven's first inhabitants, two young women who'd fled abusive situations, sat across a board game. Edith had set out, a hint of tension relaxing in their laughter. In the kitchen corner, children Josephine taught to tie yarn into small dolls, whispered plans of tomorrow's harvest bread, of planting by spring thaw. Night fell, but the windows remained bright within. Clara sat at the hearth, while Elias took his place next to her. They held hands, letting the baby's presence bind them in quiet peace. "I want our child to grow up knowing this place knew it before they arrived," Elias said softly. Clara nestled closer. "They will know your hands built it with love. They'll know how a father honors dignity, how a husband stands for justice." Her smile curved in the firelight. A child born into love, not rescued. Elias closed the gap, and he kissed her gently. Snow feathers tapped the window panes. "And we'll lift their name on the wind, like ours," Clara whispered. He nodded, eyes soft. "And here in the hush of winter's snow, I finally believe that I belong." That night, Willow Haven slept like a promise kept. Outside, the wind carried their names: Clara, Elias, Edith, Lavinia, Lucy, Josephine. Each name a seed of compassion in every flake that fell. And beneath the first snow, a child's heartbeat began the story of a family forged, where justice found a home. A gentle autumn sky arched above Willow Creek, the air crisp with promise. A light breeze carried the scent of drying leaves and freshly inked pages. Before the crowd, Clara's daughter, her small hand tucked into Clara's, stood atop the steps of a new building. Hands once bound by chains and fear now held a wooden plaque. Beneath engraved letters, it read, "Willow Creek, Public Library Knowledge, Dignity, Opportunity." A year had passed since the first snow. The day that justice first wrote at dawn had faded into legend, but the impact of that struggle still pulsed through every beam of this building. What had once been a courthouse where Clara and her sisters were lined up like livestock, sold one by their desperate father, had been reclaimed. It now held books instead of bids, stories instead of shame. Clara knelt beside her daughter, tucking loose curls behind a small ear. The child looked up, her green eyes bright with curiosity. "Can I open it now?" Mama Clara smiled, a soft ache of memory stirring behind her heart. She nodded, emotion tightening in her voice. Yes, sweetheart. But first I want to tell you something. She took a breath, looking past her daughter toward the assembled neighbors, young families, students, even Mr. Pike the deputy, who tipped his hat in respectful salute. She cleared her throat gently. A long time ago, right where your feet stand, your grandfather brought me and my sisters to be sold. He was desperate, crushed under shame, and we were treated like things, not people. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Clara pressed her daughter's hand gently. But today, she continued, her voice stronger, this place doesn't sell lives, it honors them. Here you will find the stories of people who stood tall in times of darkness. You will learn that dignity isn't given, you take it. That knowledge can free even the heaviest hearts. Clara's daughter grinned, then turned and placed her small hands on the carved door handles, pushing the library open. The doors swung wide, revealing rows of shelves and sunlight-filled reading tables. Inside, the library buzzed with warm energy. A group of boys crowded around a globe, an elderly woman reading aloud to a young couple, Edith tidying a row of history volumes, Lucy helping a teenager find her first law reference book, Lavinia perched on a stool beside a shelf of poetry. Clara stepped in beside her daughter. She swept a hand across the shelves, a gesture that felt like a benediction. Turning, she whispered softly, drawing her daughter close. And that, my love, she said, with a gentle smile, born of every trail they had traveled together, is how freedom came not on horseback, but hand in hand. As they made their way toward the reading tables, Clara's gaze found Elias across the room, his eyes soft with pride, the silver ring glinting on her hand. He nodded once subtly, raising a small book he'd tucked into his coat, their daughter's first library card. The crowd inside settled into a hushed rhythm, the library alive with purpose. Outside, leaves drifted down to softly cover the old courthouse steps, now worn to a gentle curve by the footsteps of countless readers. And beneath each footfall, the echo of a promise: here, no one would ever again be sold. Only knowledge, dignity, and freedom would pass between hearts and hands, generation to generation. From the story of Clara and the Callahan sisters, we draw a profound lesson about resilience, unity, and the priceless nature of personal freedom. In a world that once saw women as commodities, they rose not with swords, but with solidarity, courage, and unwavering belief in justice. The story reminds us that true freedom doesn't come from running away, but from facing the pain that once broke us. Clara not only rescued her sisters from physical and emotional captivity, she led them on a path of healing, where each one reclaimed her identity, not as a victim, but as an architect of her future. In today's world, we still encounter our own versions of Lavender Hollow or Benedict Shaw, forms of manipulation, societal pressure, or rigid expectations. Yet the story whispers that we each have the right to say no to the life written for us and carve our own way instead. Most importantly, it shows the power of kinship and community, how hands joined together can transform a courthouse once symbolic of injustice into a library, preserving knowledge and dignity. In our time, may we choose to stand on the side of light, not through shouting, but through quiet determination, compassion, and action. Because freedom, like love, doesn't arrive by force. It arrives when we are brave enough to reach out and hold one another.